Roksana, an allegation's been made, okay, that you've been seen on a number of occasions to assault children at Riverside Nursery.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah. Roksana, you are going to be under arrest today, okay? We need to take you to the police station, so that you can be interviewed about it.
Oh, you've heard about that, have you? Yes, it's unsurprising that you've heard about that because the complaints are about you and you were the one carrying out the abuse, you massive child predator. This case is one that just reminds you that even when you're paying absolute good money for those people to protect your children by sending them to a place of care, sometimes, just sometimes, in the shadows are perpetrators who are violent and predatory and will take every opportunity to harm the most precious thing in your life, which is, of course, your babies. And that's exactly what happens in the case of Roksana Lecka. We go back to the 28th of June, 2024, when this case really starts to unfold. 22-year-old Roksana Lecka, she was sent home early from work. She was working at Riverside Nursery in Twickenham. And the reason for this is a co-worker literally sees her pinch one of the kids. Now, immediately they review the CCTV and it tells of what the children basically couldn't, because of course, most of these children don't understand what's going on or they're non-verbal. And it turns out on that CCTV, they uncover months of sadistic physical abuse of over 20 babies and toddlers. Roksana Lecka is a reminder to each and every one of us parents that sometimes the people that you believe you should be able to trust are the very individuals you should be the most wary of. Before I kick off with the details of today's true crime case, if you are finding my content interesting, why don't you give me a like? That would be really helpful. And also, if you're coming back and you haven't yet subscribed, please do. Big shout out to those of you who are supporting me on YouTube membership and Patreon. Can't do this without you. Thank you so much for all your support. If you want more full-length content, you can get it there along with podcasts and other things that I upload. Let's talk about today's case. So let's talk about Roksana Helena Lecka, as she is known with her full name. She was born on the 13th of October 2002. She's a really young woman. Same year that she was born, my own son was born. It is pretty blindsiding that I'm talking about someone of this age who is guilty of the most heinous crimes. She was born in Katowice in southern Poland. She did, as a teenager, move to Hounslow in West London. In late 2023, she briefly worked at Little Munchkin's Nursery in Hounslow. What a lucky escape it is that she only briefly worked there. I'm sure that's terrified them to know that she was ever over their doorstep in any way, shape or form. But by January 2024, she'd moved to Riverside Nursery in Twickenham, southwest London. And I always think that when it comes down to nurseries, first of all, I think it's quite a stressful position. I genuinely do. I think that there are so many vocational roles in our society where people are massively underpaid to do a job that's stressful. Anybody who's ever had children or had contact with children knows that you are dealing with little beings of the most unbelievable value, of course. It goes without saying. But they're also, well, I think sometimes quite objectionable when it comes down to following your rules, or they maybe disagree with what you want to feed them. And that's just on a one-to-one level with kids that you adore because they're your own. Imagine timesing that by 20 and having to always be on your A game. And that's the expectation in these places, that the person's always going to be smiley, and kind of for the most part, that's exactly how these individuals are. But I do think genuinely we have an issue with underpaying people in these roles, particularly when these places in nurseries are often very expensive. And because of that, at times you do have a relatively high turnover when it comes down to staffing, because people move on to less stressful jobs that are often better paid. And that means that sometimes, not often, not always, definitely, the calibre of the individual who is in those positions might not be the ideal candidate. And like I said, this is certainly the case where Roksana Lecka is concerned. Now, bear in mind, Riverside Nursery, they genuinely are trying their best. It goes without saying. They emphasise this hands-on approach to learning. They were charging around £1,900 per month for childcare, which is absolutely harrowing, I believe, because who has got that kind of cash? And if you have got that kind of cash where you're paying £1,900 per month for childcare, you want it to be the best kind of childcare, particularly if you've got 2 children or 3 children who attend, and many parents do. And basically the age frame is from age 10 months to 2 years. Now, 10 months of age, most children are non-verbal. I would say 95% to 99% are non-verbal. There are wild exceptions to this. So please, you don't need to let me know if your child was talking at 8 months. It does rarely happen, but it does happen. But certainly at 10 months, a lot of children are toddling along, they're certainly crawling, but they're not able to communicate very effectively. They're not able to express, shall we say, that they're feeling in danger at the hands of a particular individual. They're just not old enough and grown enough to do that at that moment in time. They have different ways of expressing their discontent, but it's harder to interpret. Now, Riverside Nurseries is part of a private chain, and they actually do, to give them credit, have CCTV, which means that they do record the interactions with staff and children. But I doubt, like most places with CCTV, that they go through it regularly, because understandably, they already have their time consumed with looking after babies and children, and I'm sure it's just there as a protective mechanism, not one that they're going to be using as a detective mechanism every single day. Now, the reason that Roksana Lecka was actually discovered is basically on the 28th of June 2024, colleagues at Riverside Nursery, they just noticed that she's being rough with the kids. She's handling them in a way that doesn't feel compassionate. And then one literally sees her pinch a child's leg. So at this point, she feels this is not appropriate. There is something untoward that's happened. I've definitely seen an act of violence towards a child. And this same colleague witnessed the fact that Lecka looked almost flustered. They said that she looked like she was almost in a daze. Now, fortunately, because of the bravery of that particular individual going to management, this is how the whole case will unravel. But let's be clear. When you work in an environment, you might have alliances with people and you get on with people. You see the best in them. So very often bad behaviour can be got away with because people will give you the benefit of the doubt. So it's worth noting the fact that this individual does go and seek some kind of advice and turns in this behaviour. That's tantamount to somebody who's really excellent in their job, because it means that they are not willing to accept less than from their colleagues. And ultimately, if this hadn't been turned in, well, the chances are this girl could have got away with it again and again and again. Now, management at this point, well, they can only do one thing. They have to send Lecka home because she's acting strangely. There's been this report of her being really inappropriate around a child. And at this point, one of the teaching assistants has literally come forward and said, I've seen her pinch this boy. Also, for a period of time, staff had been noticing unexplained scratches. They'd seen bruises on some toddlers in their care. And all of a sudden, that breadcrumb trail of possibility means that serious alarm bells start going off. Now, bear in mind, even before the incident on the 28th of June, parents have been concerned. There have been red flags that have been raised. So several parents of children who'd been in Lecka's care, they said that they'd started to find very strange bruising. So they'd found red marks on their children, they'd found scratches on their children, and just an odd peppering of marks that wasn't something that was caused at home. And this was in the months between March and May 2024. Some of the things that kind of were red flag orientated were pinch mark type bruises on earlobes, arms and thighs. Now, I've worked in safeguarding, child protection, and when we were trained in that area, one of the things we're trained in is what kind of bruising patterns to look for. And the earlobes in particular is one that we often are drawn to because clearly somebody's gripping you or grabbing you or purposefully injuring you there. It's not an area that you would usually contextually get injured in as a kid. And also things like fingertip bruising around arms, around thighs, so grab marks. These are very concerning when you see it. And I guess for those in the nursery and for the parents at home who are obviously highly protective of their children, if you haven't got absolute direct evidence, it's really difficult to act on those injuries because most parents will hope that it's down to some sad accident that maybe hasn't been noted, another child may be causing it, or the child may be playing with a toy and getting injured in that respect. And that benefit of the doubt and that bias of security is why psychologically parents will continue sending a child to a nursery even when they have some concerns. Add to that the stresses and strains of ordinary life and the extraordinarily busy world that we live in nowadays. Finding new nurseries can be problematic and that can take time. So even those parents who are probably discontented, they weren't necessarily able to immediately act. They have jobs to go to. But the knowledge is there is something odd about these kind of injuries and it's caused people to be concerned. And it's not just the parents. There are workers who have this concern as well. Some parents were so concerned they actually took pictures to document the marks that they found on their children because they were growing more and more suspicious. And one father later down the line, he said that he and his wife believed if Lecka hadn't been caught when she was, she could likely have gone on to seriously injure or even kill a child. And I would absolutely agree with that. You push boundaries. And if you have a psychology of somebody who basically enjoys witnessing pain, so you have a sadistic streak within you, you only get the thrill of that as you hurt more and more, because you get to a point where you're getting away with it and you're enjoying it and it makes you feel that you're in control and you've got the power, and then you push those boundaries again and again and again. And because you get away with it, there's no consequential reinforcement, you're not being stopped, and that means it's going to incentivize those actions. So I would agree fully with that particular parent or set of parents. Now, after June 28th, the nursery's management, they obviously need to take some very swift action, because there have been these rumours that have been going around. Also, they've got a direct witness now who's seen this woman pinching a child. So at this point, they start trawling through recent CCTV recordings just to see what had happened, and also just to track back, because could this be a one-off? Potentially. Could this be unforgivable? Absolutely. But could this just be a very bad day for this worker? Again, that would not excuse it in any way, shape or form, but it isn't a pattern of abusive behaviour. It's just one occasion, which again would lead to her being disciplined and removed from her position, but it wouldn't indicate there'd been something consistent and systemic within the actual environment she's been working in. So initially, they checked footage around the time of the reported pinching evidence, because clearly they've had a witness to this, and they indeed see her manhandling the child. She's actually pinching the toddler's nose, body, wrist, and mouth. Now, this kind of impact shows that she's got confidence. She's done this before, without a doubt. You wouldn't start by pinching a child all over. You'd start by maybe once or twice pinching a child, because you're going to test the boundaries, you're going to see what you can get away with. So this shows that she's got used to this kind of action. Now, the minute that they find this footage, of course, she's suspended from her job immediately. And then they decide, we're going to have to review all the CCTV. We need to look at when Lecka was working. We need to figure out, is this an isolated incident, or is this something even more sinister than what they witnessed? They also inform the Metropolitan Police, and rightfully so, and they end up reviewing over 300 hours of CCTV footage, and it's horrific, because it certainly was not an isolated incident. They basically uncover a pattern of absolutely relentless abuse. So there are dozens of incidents, and she employs different tactics when it comes down to the physical abuse. So pinching and scratching is the most frequent abuse that she bestows on these children. She's caught pinching children's arms and legs and stomachs under their clothing. Also, these would leave red marks and bruises, which is why the parents are noticing this. Some babies, because bear in mind, 10 months, there are children of 10 months of age. They're being pinched dozens of times over the course of one day. Over the course simply of one day, let alone weeks of being there. And when she was doing it, the babies are crying out in pain. So this is really hurting them. And they haven't got the opportunity to discuss this with a worker. They can't let anybody know that she's the guilty party. They're just adapting to an environment of hostility. And can you imagine the trauma that's going to cause for the child? Imagine the separation anxiety it's going to cause from the parents, because they're fearful for what's going to happen to them. They can't even express that apart from in their behaviour. And this is no doubt why some parents are becoming hypervigilant about their child, because they won't just have noticed marks, they'll have noticed a change in the way that the child is reacting to their environment. Now, also, it was seen on CCTV that she'd sometimes scratch the children's skin. She'd reach under the sleeves or the pant legs to do so. So she doesn't want it to be obvious to everybody. Now, clearly, if you're changing a nappy, you'll notice those things. But with respect, she's trying to get away with it. She's absolutely aware of how to inflict an injury under the radar, ideally. So that shows absolutely calculated behaviour. This is not somebody who's reacting out of stress. This is somebody who's reacting because they wish to react in this way. Now, the police later noted that a lot of the injuries were on the earlobes, on armpits, inner arms, and of course, that means that it's where accidental bruising is unlikely. So again, shows that this is actually an incident where a predator has had access to a child and is individually attacking them, and that's causing injuries that we would not normally see in children of this age. But also, she slapped, she punched, she grabbed kids. In fact, she'd just walk past a child and slap them without any cause whatsoever. Of course, there is no reason for cause. It wouldn't matter if a child was melting down on the floor. It wouldn't matter if a child was kicking and screaming and you were in the line of fire. That happens with a lot of toddlers, and believe me, I've been kicked by toddlers more times than I care to mention. But the reality is that as an adult, you hold back. It doesn't matter how frustrated you are. It doesn't matter how stressed you are. It doesn't matter how hurt you are in that moment. You do not slap a child. But I guess that one of the things that they would be looking at mitigation-wise later in court is, was there any reasoning behind her behaviour? Was she in a situation where she'd just been punched in the face by a leg, for example, and did she react in the heat of the moment? And that's not the case at all. There is no reasoning behind her action. She's just going ahead and harming these babies. She punched at least one baby. She dragged a baby out of a cot. She punched the child after she did that. And she's seen grabbing a child by the neck. She's seen kicking. She literally kicked a little boy, in the face multiple times. He had basically been sitting and lying on the floor, and Lecka just kicks him several times in the head. Then she steps on his shoulder with her foot. Bear in mind, you can't even begin to imagine how terrifying that is for the child, but how damaging for him physically. She then, after she's done this, isn't satisfied, she kicks him in the stomach. She's also seen pushing and throwing children into their cots, or she'd toppled them over into bedding. And on one CCTV clip, it actually shows Lecka shoving a child headfirst over the side of the cot. Now, just think about that. How vulnerable is a child in that situation? How damaging could that be physically? I mean, it could easily have caused neck trauma, head injuries, harrowing. And then, and this really chills me to the bone, she would smother children. So she would literally smother children, particularly if they were crying, because she wanted them to stop. Now, we all know how little time it takes to cut off an oxygen supply to a small child and how dangerous that is, if not fatal. So this girl has the potential to kill that father who said, we believe that if she hadn't been stopped, this would have escalated to a point of serious injury or death. 100%. Because if you are smothering babies, if you are smothering children, you have the capacity to kill. And to add to this reality that she was just beyond dangerous, she's seen force feeding a child, ramming food into the mouth literally until they choke. Now, anybody who's ever been with their babies when they start to struggle with a piece of food, it is something that slows down time. A second becomes an eternity. It is absolutely terrifying. And you know that it's unbelievably dangerous if a child does get a piece of food stuck in their throat, because they can die. The fact that she's actually trying to exacerbate that possibility by ramming food into a little child's mouth, again, it speaks of her potential. She was also seen pulling the toddler's ears, yanking their hair. She was seen forcibly twisting their toes, and you can imagine the pain that would cause, because children's bones are developing, aren't they? They don't break, funnily enough, as easily as us older people like me. If I just go off a step in the wrong direction, then you can imagine I'm going to immediately break my ankle. That's the joy of getting older, isn't it? But when it comes down to babies and children, everything is still developing, so you can kind of do those things without causing obvious damage. But the pain those kids are going to be in is going to be immense. She was also seen violently rocking cots with babies inside. So every place of safety, every sense of security is just being disabled by this woman. And also, it wasn't as if this was an isolated 1 or 2 incidents a day. It's constant. It's multiple assaults per day on multiple children. In fact, the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, they noted that some children literally endured a dozen or more pinches in one single day with her. And Gemma Burns, who was a CPS lawyer, they said that Lecka clearly targeted children when colleagues were either out of the room or if they had their backs turned, so just taking the opportunity to harm kids at any opportunity. And heartbreakingly, CCTV basically identified one pattern. So after being hurt, some of the babies would reach back out towards Lecka because they were desperate for some comfort. Isn't that horrific? So she causes this pain, and the immediacy for the child is to seek someone who can protect them. And the very person that they're reaching out to is the perpetrator of that pain. But because they believe that soothing should come after, because that's what happens at home, isn't it? If you've got a child who's harmed, if you've got a child who's hurt or sick, they reach out to you when they're struggling because they're used to a primary carer or somebody within the wider family reaching in and cuddling them. And so that's devastating, isn't it? They are literally reaching out to the person who's harmed them, asking her to soothe them. And of course, she's the kind of individual who would like that because it shows ultimate control, ultimate power. Yeah, I can hurt you, and even then, you're going to come to me. And imagine how that would look to other workers if they're reaching out to her. Well, that makes her seem like a safe place. And it basically would seem to suggest that she's somebody that the child trusts, but it's not. It's just that innate reaction. I'm a baby, I'm in pain, I need somebody to help me. And the unprofessional behaviour didn't stop there. Not that that's surprising with respect. So it actually emerges during them reviewing the CCTV that Lecka is vaping on the job in front of the kids. So CCTV actually catches her vaping around a metre away from a baby's cot. And that's going to be devastating if you're a parent, particularly for a parent who's against vaping, against smoking. You've sent your child there to be healthy and looked after and protected, not to be contaminated by air that you would not approve of. And she was so manipulative. She hid a vape in her bra because she didn't want to get caught. She knew that you weren't allowed to vape in that environment. Also, she down the line admits that she was routinely smoking weed before her shifts at the nursery, because who wouldn't want an absolutely stoned nursery worker in charge of your children? In fact, leading up to the week that she was suspended, apparently she'd been smoking cannabis all night with her boyfriend. So brilliant, just what you want. That's what you imagine, isn't it? When you've got somebody who's going to be caring for your child, you just want those who don't know what's going on because they're absolutely high as a kite. And also, they're prioritising their boyfriend instead of the job that they're there to do. Co-workers also recalled that there was something about Lecka's nature that was a little bit off in general, but when she wasn't allowed to vape, because obviously she's meant to be looking after kids, so you can't just go off somewhere and vape, you've got to wait for your breaks, she would seem really irritable. And she ends up again down the line admitting that she was addicted to vaping. And I think people really struggle with that because the idea of being addicted to vaping seems a little bit nonsensical. How do you get addicted to that? But of course, a lot of vapes have nicotine when they use that kind of vapor itself that's high level nicotine content, and people do get addicted to it. Also, the habit itself, people, particularly when they're stressed, will often use things like vapes to just kind of decompress a little bit. And when you haven't got that opportunity, then you are going to be more stressed. Now, other aspects of the investigation included the physical evidence, of course. So alongside the CCTV, police got medical reports because clearly they want to corroborate the abuse. And also some parents have been really concerned about the injuries that have been happening to the children. So they've taken photos. They also had GP records about this. And of course, when it comes down to building the case, they bring in medical experts who can analyse the injuries and give some licence to understand where those injuries could have come from and whether they were indeed expected to be from somebody perpetrating abuse. Now, all staff members at Riverside Nursery were also interviewed, and at least one teaching assistant reported that she had previously seen Lecka pinch a child, which we know because that's why this case started to unravel. Also, because CCTV outlined that there were 23 victims. That is just unbelievable, isn't it? 23 victims of Lecka. That meant they had to interview all the children's parents because, first of all, they need to discount that any injuries actually happened at home and not at the hands of Lecka, and also just to gather the suspicions that they had and obviously take the information away if they had recorded injuries by taking photographs. So we get to the 5th of July 2024. At this point, they have enough information to arrest her at her home on suspicion of multiple child cruelty offences. Clearly, they have a plethora of evidence, and the arrest took place just 1 week after the initial incident came to light. So they have a slam dunk case as far as they're concerned.
Roksana, an allegation's been made, okay, that you've been seen on a number of occasions to assault children at Riverside Nursery.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah. Roksana, you are going to be under arrest today, okay? We need to take you to the police station, so that you can be interviewed about it.
Now, during her first interview with the police, Lecka, what can I say, she was on the rather uncooperative side, and she goes no comment.
Picture Mum took when she came home from nursery. None of these injuries were there the day before, so she got those at nursery. What about these big red marks and bruises to her back? Any idea about those?
No comment.
Did you cause those?
No comment.
When I go through and watch the footage, am I going to see you touching her back and grabbing her back?
No comment.
Anything you'd like to say?
No comment.
Roksana, how does that make you feel, seeing injury photos on a baby? Because for me, I find that really difficult to look at. Seeing clear marks on a little baby. How does that make you feel?
No comment.
Do you feel any sort of sadness about that?
No comment.
Would you just not care?
No comment.
No? Okay.
Now, we often see that people go no comment because they're guilty as hell, but often it's because they're banking on people not having a lot of evidence about them. The fact that she would be aware that CCTV was everywhere should give her some kind of understanding that she's going to get caught, that people are going to have this evidence. They've built a case around literally her actions being on video. And so it's almost pointless going no comment because it's all there in front of everybody's eyes. And she basically just refuses to acknowledge any actions that she's been responsible for. And she just constantly says no comment. She gives a prepared statement. And in that prepared statement, again, it's ludicrous. She denies assaulting any children at Riverside Nursery and claimed that she had a, quote, normal day on the 28th of June 2024. You are correct, Lecka. You did have a normal day, and that normal day for you is abusing children. So nobody is surprised. The very fact that she identifies it as a normal day demonstrates that was indeed normal for her. And it really does beg the question, did Lecka actually feel justified in her attacks on these children? Did she see that as normal? Does she believe that harming children because you're having a bad day, you can't vape, is completely okay? Because for a normal day to involve lots of abuse of children says something about your psychology. Yes, one can say, well, maybe she's just denying it. She's just acting as if, oh, it was a normal day, everything was great, I didn't do anything wrong. Or is she genuinely just intonating that is normal for her? Like, at the end of the day, the fact that she releases a statement saying, I'm unaware how any injury to these children would cause when she's on video, well, that demonstrates that she's either overconfident and believes that maybe they haven't got the information that's going to condemn her, or she genuinely is so normalised around abuse, it just doesn't even register with her. Now, after she has this police interview, because the investigation at this point is still ongoing, she's initially released on bail. But understandably, she is suspended from work at this point. Now we get to the 25th of July 2024. That's when Lecka is charged with 12 counts of child cruelty, 12 counts of actual bodily harm, and 1 count of attempting to cause grievous bodily harm with intent. And that GBH charge came from the incident in which Lecka kicked a child in the head multiple times. Now, as the case progresses, the prosecutors, they went ahead and streamlined the charges to focus more on the child cruelty statute. So at Lecka's first court appearance, the indictment was amended to 24 counts of cruelty to a person under 16. So that means that both the ABH and GBH charges were dropped. So the 24 counts reflected the 23 victims. When she was first charged, Lecka unbelievably pleaded not guilty to all counts, which is ludicrous. Just maintains complete denial. I didn't do it. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, sorry, you're literally on video. I did not do it though. I didn't do it. I wasn't there. It's literally you. I was just having a normal day. I was having a normal day. What do you want about? Well, it's just that you're on the CCTV violently attacking these children. It's not me. It really is you. You're vaping. I don't even have a vape in my bra at all. Honestly, but this is not unusual. We see individuals like Lecka all the time thinking somehow they can outsmart the law, or somehow the CPS haven't built a really strong case and the prosecution don't know what they're doing. I mean, that's a really bizarre hope, but that's obviously what she's going for. Now, like I said, she just says, I've had nothing to do with this. But then when we get to the start of the Crown Court trial in May 2025, guess what? She changed her plea to guilty on 7 of the counts. So basically she's saying, I am guilty of some, but I'm not actually guilty of all. And again, we see this with perpetrators when they believe that maybe they're not going to be able to get away with A, B or C because it's very evident that they are guilty of those. But by saying, well, I am guilty of those, but I'm not guilty of the others, they hope that people will be like, oh, well, she's admitted to these ones, so it's unlikely that she is guilty of all of the others. That's not how it works, because any jury is going to sit there, or any prosecution is going to take that and think to themselves, wow, hang on a minute, you are capable of doing this. Why would I not believe you're capable of doing all the other things where the other charges are concerned? So at this point, again, she says, yes, I'm guilty to 7 other counts, but I'm not guilty on the remaining 17 counts. Now, her full trial began on the 8th of May 2025. It began at Kingston Crown Court and it lasted 6 weeks. So it's a big old case. The judge presiding over this was Sarah Plushks and the prosecution was led by Tracy Ayling. And of course, the prosecution have got so much evidence, so much. So the jury had just shown numerous CCTV clips that demonstrate Lecka's perpetual abuse. One video that was shown to the jury actually showed her pinching a boy's nose, then his torso, then his wrist and his mouth. The kid's really distressed, obviously. Another clip shows her grabbing this toddler by the neck, and this actually drew audible gasps from those watching in the public gallery, which it would. Because if you're a well-adjusted, typical human being who is an adult, you will protect a stranger's children. You don't need to know who they are. They're just kids. They're vulnerable. They need you. Your help. So when you see an adult going ahead and harming a child that they're going to care for, be compassionate towards, and they do it in such a horrendous way, grabbing their neck. This is a little child. Grabbing the neck of that little child, of course, is an act of violence that is so outlandish that it's going to be absolutely distressing to witness. But the most dramatic footage was actually the footage of her kicking the toddler in the face and stepping on him. I mean, how grotesque is that? Now, the lead prosecutor, Tracy Ayling, she narrated the context throughout all the clips. She pointed out how Lecka looked around for witnesses, which shows that she knew exactly what she was going to do. She knew when she was going to do it. She knew how she was going to do it. And she checked that no one was seeing what she was doing before actually carrying out the abuse. That 100%, 1000% underscores intent. Tracy Ayling said, you might see from the footage of her watching other members of staff as she harms a child, just checking if another member of staff is watching. Now, they brought in Dr. Stephen Rose. He's a consultant paediatrician, expert witness. And that expert witness told the jury that the wounds, which included the bruised earlobes, the torsos, the thighs, they could only have been deliberate. He said, ears do not get injured or bruised accidentally. If it is a bruise, it was caused non-accidentally or deliberately inflicted. He said the side of the torso is relatively protected by the arm, so it is not an area that is bruised accidentally. Now, I'm sure that some of you are thinking, well, an expert witness is going to say, absolutely, this is the case because they're on the side of the prosecution. And I will also agree that at times it would be possible for the side of the torso to get injured accidentally. I mean, I think we've seen kids go down slides where the arms are raised and they've banged on the side, so that definitely can happen. But they're ultimately saying it's not common. I mean, they're being absolute in the statement, but it's not common. It's the same with the ears. Look, it's very unusual to get any kind of bruising around the ears, but again, some people will have experienced it. So just to note that some of you will be listening and thinking to yourselves, well, I think he's being a little bit too pure in his belief that no injuries can occur in that respect. But I think for the most part, those injuries would be very uncommon. Now, when it came to the defence, well, Roksana Lecka actually took the stand in her own defence. And I think that one of the reasons for that is they're trying to put her across as this petite, blonde, young girl who's naive and innocent. And at the end of the day, did she really know what she was doing? To try to undermine the prosecution, posing her as this predator of the highest level. But that's not going to be effective because anybody listening to this will be thinking to themselves, you are a giant to those dots. You are a giant to those children. You can do so much damage just because of your physical size. It doesn't matter that if you were against another average female, you might be more small, you might be more petite. The point is, you are highly dangerous, as you are shown to be in the CCTV footage and in the pictures that the parents have gathered. But essentially, she goes on that stand, she denies intentionally harming any of the kids. I didn't mean to harm anybody when I was kicking them in the face. I didn't mean to harm anyone when I was literally smothering them. I didn't mean to harm anyone when I was forcing food into their mouth to a point where they might choke. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I was just going about my business when I was vaping over a baby. Now, of course, the prosecution are going to use every opportunity to just dissemble any of her suggestions that she didn't know what she was doing. They basically confront her and say, why did you lie? Why did you deny everything? Because she obviously has done that, but then she's pled guilty to 7 counts. So that doesn't make any sense. And she says, I was not lying because I was unaware of what I was doing. I can't remember the things I was doing. All right, it's very convenient. Yeah, well, it might be convenient for you, but I can't even remember what I just said because I don't have a memory. I don't know what I'm doing ever. So let's just run through this. Let's just run through this, shall we, as the prosecution? Well, if I can remember, I'll try. So are you saying that you've pled guilty to 7 of these counts? Yeah, although I don't remember pleading guilty to them. You're in court right now doing that. Okay, I'm just trying to highlight that I don't remember very much. And you're saying that in spite of the fact you've pled guilty to several of these counts, and indeed seen yourself on CCTV, that you don't remember anything. No, it's strange. I literally remember nothing. I mean, I remember things that could suggest I haven't done things, but I don't remember anything that could suggest I have done things. I don't know why I did those things because I'm not even sure it was me. I mean, I'm there doing it, but I don't remember. So strange things happen, don't they? Yes, strange things happen when people come into court expecting that anyone's going to buy the BS that you're spinning. Honestly, I can't remember it. Isn't that just a shock reaction for so many predators? Can you just evidence why you feel that you have a right to deny these charges? I have evidence that I remember nothing because I was too stoned, or I was confused, or I was in a situation where I was so stressed that I went blurry in my brain. All those make no sense to anybody listening, but we see this played out time and time again. And she basically says, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing because I was massively high on my weed. Yeah, again, as if that is a mitigating factor. That's an aggravating factor. If you're saying, I couldn't remember all the things I was doing because I was high on weed, you are purposefully ingesting a substance and then going to work with children you're meant to safeguard. And also, what does that tell you about her willingness to put those children at harm? Either way, whichever way you cut it. If she's in a situation where she's so stoned, she literally has no memory, which is a lie, I get it. But let's play with that for a moment. If she's saying that, well, she is putting your child at risk by not being compos mentis on the job. And also, just going to throw it out there. Not going to split hairs in this one. We all know she's guilty. But the very fact that she's looking around before she kicks kids in the head to check that she can get away with it says, you absolutely knew what you were doing. But that's what she's going to push. She said, I was smoking cannabis that was affecting my memory. And I'm just going to throw it out there. Whether you do smoke cannabis or you don't smoke cannabis, I'm not a judge on that. The reality is, I know a ton of people who smoke cannabis. I'm going to be honest with you. Some of them don't have the greatest memories, but let me tell you, they remember normal things. And certainly if they were to boot a kid in the head, they would certainly remember that. The idea that these people that you know are walking around, and we will all know many people who smoke weed, and that they have no recollection of anything is ludicrous. Could you imagine that? Nothing would get done. So many people smoke cannabis that if you just could say, oh, I don't remember any of that, you could get away with that on every single level, couldn't you? At the end of the day, I've been in for my job and it turns out I haven't actually gone for 3 weeks. I thought I'd gone, but it turns out I was just smoking weed and it's affected my memory. I mean, it's literally licensed in certain places to help people with headaches and sleep and all of these things. So the idea that you'd be wandering around going, I have no recollection of the fact that I've just wrapped my vehicle around a tree, I can't be responsible because I was really high on weed, it doesn't wash, does it? But essentially, she's arguing that, yes, you might see me doing these things on video, but I don't actually recall doing them. And it wasn't intentional when I did it because I was so high or I was so exhausted. That was another thing that she pushed. I was just very tired and stressed. And she actually went on to tell the court that she was under personal stress. She struggled with mood swings. Again, maybe don't work with children. Just going to throw it out there. You've made an active choice. Not that you remember it because you're so stoned, but for the most part, you will have made an active choice to actually get a job with children. And guess what? Children are wonderful beings. They're also quite stressful at times. So if you struggle with stress and personal moods and you have these swings in your behaviour, it's not the place and position for you. She also told the court that she was addicted to vaping. She said that she would smoke 2 little crystal disposables a day. She said, I was vaping in nursery because if I didn't smoke, I would get agitated and fed up. I couldn't keep asking to go to the toilet. Any opportunity I would take, I'd be really moody and fed up. You know what that means? It means you're a massively egocentric, selfish individual who doesn't care about anybody but their own needs. There you go. wrapped it up for you, neatly packaged it, given it back to you, as is reality. So the idea that she's a victim in this, that she was addicted, that she was having a problem, that she was stressed, that she needed to go and smoke her vape or there'd be consequences for everybody else, it shows the level of narcissism involved in this. She said it would be a couple of puffs and then I'd put it away, I'd put it in my bra. So there again, that doesn't make sense, does it? So you remember putting it in your bra? Sorry? You remember putting the vape in your bra? Let me just think about that. I'm not sure. You just told the court that you were aware that you were putting the vape in your bra to disguise it so that you could get away with vaping. You seem to remember that, don't you? Yes, I've not really thought about this because that would indicate, that's right, that would indicate that you absolutely knew that you had a vape in your bra, which would mean that you remember all the other things that you did, including abusing children. Just gonna put that out there to all of you. That's where all of our brains are right now, isn't it? And she also went on and said that she was over-prioritising her boyfriend. She said, I was with my boyfriend every night. I was addicted to him. Poor boyfriend. So you've just been dragged in as a reasoning behind abusing children. I mean, if you're not just addicted to your boyfriend and that gives you license to harm children, I don't know what kind of relationship you're having. Ludicrous. Now, the defence, they, of course, came out and had this prepared statement saying, Lecka claimed, we have procedures for the handling of the children, which I adhered to. I am unaware how any injury was caused. Oh, that's convenient, Lecka, because just sit down here for a while and we'll just take you through every single CCTV video that you're on being the antagonist and violently abusing kids, just so we can refresh your memory. And no, you can't vape whilst you're watching it. Honestly, the defence coming out with that statement, it's abhorrent, really, because we all know how the injury was caused. It's been played out in real time on that CCTV. Now, when it came down to the verdict, bear in mind she'd pled guilty to 7 of these offences and pled not guilty to the rest of them. So this verdict comes on the 16th of June 2025 and, well, you're not going to be surprised, are you? She was convicted on 21 of the 24 counts of child cruelty. She was actually found not guilty on 3 counts and the jury decision was unanimous because it was absolutely clear the kind of perpetrator she was. Now, outside the courtroom, after the sentencing had been passed, Scotland Yard detectives and the CPS publicly commended the outcome. They were thrilled that they got this. The Metropolitan Police, in a press statement, highlighted that the parents thanked officers for giving their children a voice when they didn't have one. I think that's so true because these children couldn't complain. They couldn't speak of their horror. They couldn't deal with the situation personally because the reality is they were too small. They needed protective mechanisms to be in place. In fact, some parents recorded a thank you video featuring the children just to express gratitude to the police and to the prosecution team, which I think is a lovely touch. And I think in a world where the police right now are feeling that maybe they're not number one in the views positively held by the nation, it's really helpful to just remember the nuances, the amazing police officers out there who are working so hard to make a difference to this world, and in this case have made a huge difference to those children's worlds. Also, a spokesperson from Riverside Nurseries who must have been horrendously impacted by this awful case, because that's reputational damage that can often be unsurvivable for companies. They said, this has been a distressing case, particularly for the children and families directly affected. Our thoughts are first and foremost with those families. Although Roksana Lecka was not convicted on all charges, today's verdict confirms the seriousness of those concerns. Situations like this are deeply upsetting and represent a profound breach of trust in a professional. Creating places in which children are happy, safe and able to thrive is our top priority, and we will do everything in our power to protect that. And you can imagine that some of her colleagues will feel guilty by association, not that they should. And also the management will probably be scrabbling around desperately trying to put in place protective mechanisms that are going to prevent this happening again. It's really hard, isn't it? Because you don't want retrospective understanding of what needed to change. You want it to be something that people predict needs to occur, so we prevent these things occurring. So they're going to have some issues without a doubt. And I wonder whether some of the parents might even think that it's worth taking some kind of civil case out against the nurseries. We'll see that in the future potentially. Now, D.I. Shan Hutchins, she was somebody who worked on the case, and they said these families left their children in Lecka's care. Trusting her to protect their children as well as other staff at the nurseries clearly did, and that's so important. The other workers did, particularly the one who spoke out when she saw something untoward. D.I. Shan Hutchins, who worked on the case, said these families left their children in Lecka's care, trusting her to protect their children as well as the other staff at the nurseries clearly did. The footage of her offences against defenceless children was disturbing. I would like to praise the strength of the victims' families who have had to sit in court and watch footage of the abuse which Lecka inflicted on their children. And I think that's another layer to this trauma, isn't it? The parents literally saw their children being attacked. I mean, they had the suspicions, they were concerned about what was going on. They were very effective in recording the concerns that they had by taking photographs, but to actually sit with a group of strangers as well who have come to watch the actual court case play out and to watch your child being at the centre of that abuse, that must be absolutely stomach churning. And of course, you've gone out of your way as a parent to try to protect your child. You've put them in a place where you're paying a lot of money for them to go ahead and actually look after your babies. And it turns out they've been experiencing this trauma. That's something that makes you question every avenue of care that your children will ever endure. You know, you'll be worried about when you send them to school. What if a teacher does this? Because if these kind of predators can hide in plain sight and be so confident in their ability to abuse that they do it even on CCTV, well, it means that if there's one, there are others as well. And what if your child comes across this kind of predator again? And I guess that's going to really impact on the way their children are going to be brought up. Now, senior Crown Prosecutor Gemma Burns said, Lecka repeatedly showed exceptional cruelty in her appalling treatment of these babies. No parent should have to fear leaving their child in the care of professionals, but the sheer scale of the abuse is staggering, and they labelled her actions as vile abuse of vulnerable victims. Also, you won't be surprised that a number of parents have contacted solicitors after Lecka's abuse has emerged. So solicitor Jem Till from Irwin Mitchell spoke out about the case and said the families we represent are not only deeply shocked, but also traumatised by what their children have endured. This is sadly yet another devastating case where children have suffered at the hands of someone in a position of trust. Whilst Lecka's actions have been stopped, the consequences of those actions are likely to affect families for many years. Nothing can undo what has happened, but it's now vital that lessons are learned and, where appropriate, measures introduced to prevent other children being harmed. Now, Marina Wilson, who's the Liberal Democrat MP for Twickenham, said it was incredibly important that families see justice done and the children get all the support they need to recover from this trauma. She's claimed that there is absolute need for urgent reforms to make nurseries and early years settings safe for our children. Said nurseries must be subject to no-notice Ofsted inspections where safeguarding concerns can be raised and CCTV footage is reviewed. She said every parent should know their child is safe when left at nursery. For those of you who don't know what Ofsted is, it's basically the body who oversees education in the UK, and they can do spot checks on schools, and they can also do really formal reviews of schools. But with respect, Ofsted is not a perfect group of individuals, and let me tell you, I've worked hand in hand in education for many years, and I don't believe that those spot checks would likely make any difference. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely believe that if you've got CCTV, reviewing that CCTV is probably a very effective measure, because you want to make sure that your staff are working effectively. Equally, I think it's a difficult line to tread because for the personal privacy of individuals working, they might not feel comfortable being videoed every second of the day. So it's one of those difficult conversations that I think employers are going to be having with staff, because some people genuinely won't feel okay being videoed constantly. It feels like absolute surveillance, and it means that they feel that there's a lack of trust. Equally, if you're a parent, you want to make sure that you have dotted every I and crossed every T where safety is concerned. And I would imagine that most parents would actually see CCTV as something that they were ready to demand in these circumstances and situations. Now, the sentencing for Lecka happened on the 26th of September 2025, so she returned to Kingston Crown Court to hear her fate. This was 3 months after her conviction. Judge Plaschks sentenced Lecka to 8 years in prison, so she's got a decent amount of time in prison. She's also been permanently barred, rightfully so, from working with children. I don't believe that that would actually be something that would happen if she returned to Poland. I imagine that what we rule in the UK would not apply there, but certainly in the UK, she's never going to be allowed to work with children again. She was also placed on the DBS children's barred list. So that would mean if they did an enhanced check when she went to work for somebody, it would turn up that she'd been charged and sentenced for this crime, which would mean that she'd be discounted from working with vulnerable individuals. Now, in delivering the sentence, the judge characterised Lecka's actions as gratuitous violence, and rightfully so. This judge also noted that Lecka was often targeting children who were not even misbehaving or in need of discipline. Don't get me wrong, when I read those sentences in Marats, I thought, you know what? No one at nursery should be disciplining anyone. These are kids. These are really small children. At the end of the day, you should be able to deal with the situation peacefully and calmly. And as a parent, I would not want you disciplining my child because they were misbehaving at that age. I would just want you to figure out some strategies that would engage them positively so that there would not be those kind of issues. But I can understand what they're suggesting is maybe if she was stressed and then a child is misbehaving, she reacts in anger, and that would at least have this linearity to the action, although it'd be reprehensible. But there was not even that kind of cause to her behaviour. They said in the summing up, often the child would be quietly and happily minding its own business before you deliberately inflicted pain. Well, yeah, that's what sadists do. Sadists want to inflict pain on kids that are feeling safe because that exacerbates their enjoyment because the child reacts rightfully in a very distressed way, and that feeds the sadist. They also pointed out how Lecka remained calm and observant when she was actually causing the suffering, so she was literally watching them and enjoying it because that's what sadists do. That's what sadists do constantly. They really enjoy their work. And she had so much opportunity there. These were children who could not ask for their own needs to be met. And she loved that. You are almost omnipotent on. You're God. You're a giant. You can do what you want to these children. And those kids don't understand either. They don't understand why this is happening. They're too little. They haven't got a reference of how the world's meant to treat you at this point. That happens years down the line. They know that they're safe at home. They know that they're loved at home. They feel security at home. But obviously, when you transition to nursery, it does impact and destabilise attachment to some degree because it's a whole new environment. It's quite fear-provoking. And whilst children at times seem to thrive, it doesn't come without its battles. And so parents are on the back foot because they will see these changes to their child's life, and part of them will think maybe it's just they're in this environment. Maybe it's just because of the transition between home and nursery. And even though in the back of their mind they'll be thinking maybe something bad is happening, they're going to obviously want to put that bias of security in front of their fear of things that could play out horribly at nursery and just buy into the belief system that it's all okay. But like I said, that creates the perfect storm. The child who can't ask for help and the parent who's trying to just put this down to a transition period, and a child who's maybe just feeling a little bit uncomfortable in an environment because they're not with mummy or daddy. So the judge is basically highlighting her as a sadist, and that's correct. She is sadistic. They said, you pinched, slapped, punched, smacked, and kicked them. You pulled their ears, hair, and the toes. You toppled children head first into cots. You caused bruising and lingering red marks. When it came down to victim impact statements, the sentencing hearing had very powerful ones. Basically, one mother literally looked directly at Lecka and said, you preyed on innocent and vulnerable children. They couldn't speak. They couldn't defend themselves. They couldn't tell us, as parents, that something had happened to them. They were totally helpless, and Roksana preyed upon them. Then a different mother highlighted that some of the CCTV footage had shown babies, as I said earlier, reaching back out to Lecka after she'd actually hurt them. And this mother said, it is objectively shocking that she's been hiding in plain sight in society up until she was arrested. I think all of us can agree that the only kind of worst human would be able to assault vulnerable babies. And I think amen to that. She's absolutely correct. Now, since this case has been calls for reforms and safeguarding, some experts are advocating that nurseries should implement frequent random reviews of CCTV footage because they're seeing that as a deterrent and a detection mechanism. But let me tell you, predators will find a way. That's what they do all the time. That's why they're successful, and it takes a while to catch them. They get braver and bolder and more confident, and that tends to be their undoing. But there are ways to harm children in private, even when you've got CCTV on you, because, for example, toilets, these kind of areas I doubt will have CCTV. If a predator really wants to harm a child, they will go ahead and do it. So it's challenging for any place to create a perfectly safe zone. And that's the real difficulty for parents as well. Now, clearly, Lecka passed references, so she got a job. So that asks a question, do we need more investigations in the backgrounds of these individuals? Should we have psychological screening? Because that could essentially, to some degree, minimise hiring sadistic staff. But again, if you're a highly predatorial manipulator, you're going to know how to pass those anyway. Understandably, they've said that more training needs to happen. They need to help staff recognise early warning signs, and some nurseries have actually began to offer a live CCTV feed. So it gives parents access, and that means that they can just see that the environment is completely transparent in nature. But it's not that widespread in the UK. At the moment, it's considered quite controversial. Data protection and privacy is something that's still taken seriously. So to some degree, some nurseries are not going to be doing that. But I would imagine in time, it will become more commonplace. And this really got me, this particular piece of knowledge that I picked up. I found this online, and it's not been widely reported, but it just speaks to me about the nature of Lecka. Because apparently, since she's gone to prison, she's become very good friends with a very evil woman. In fact, they're known as being best pals now. So Roksana Lecka is now good mates with babysitter killer Sabrina Cloyder. Apparently, they are inseparable in jail. Both of them are inmates at HMP Bronzefield. Apparently, they are uber confident, they strut around, they act like they're in charge. And bear in mind, you would expect that child predators and babysitter killers, because what that woman did in the case of the babysitter being murdered is they starved her to death before brutalising her and murdering her. So that's the level of sadism that's involved in that particular case. And you would imagine that the women around them would treat them quite badly, because nobody likes child predators, and certainly people who abuse and sadistically kill innocent girls. But because they are so sadistic in nature, because they're going to be quite scary as well, bear that in mind. If you're a female prisoner, often you're in a situation where you haven't actually carried out a very serious crime. It's not like a male prison in the UK. And they obviously feel a level of confidence and power because they have this sadism running through their veins. And they apparently have a huge amount of, quote, vanity rather than contrition. And they just dress up with fake eyelashes. They're always wearing makeup. They apparently sit around hanging out, mocking other prisoners. And they've shown no remorse. Don't get me wrong. Wherever I was, I'd definitely put black eyeliner on. But there's just something about how they seem to think that there's something special in prison. And that's come directly from the prisoners who spent time with them. And they've apparently been given the title glam lags. And this has even angered those hardened criminals who were on their block. One former prisoner who was serving a sentence for assault said, Lecka would walk around like she'd not done anything. She looks down on people, and she's very good friends with Sabrina Cloyder, who killed her babysitter, they're best pals. Sabrina is a narcissistic, horrible person. And like I said, the fact that they're bullying others demonstrates that sadism is still running through every single atom in their bodies. This prisoner actually went on to say, I would see them every day. I would not talk to Roksana as I couldn't stand what she'd done, but she's boastful. She thinks so highly of herself. She's very vain, always dressed up with eyelashes and makeup on. They're more focused on their image than showing any remorse for what they did. Which just beggars belief, doesn't it? Because it sounds like prison isn't too bad for her. It sounds like at the end of the day, she's feeling pretty confident where she is. And that is disturbing, because the reality is, yes, prison is about rehabilitation. Of course it is. But it's also about punishment. And I'm not enjoying the fact that she isn't acting in a way that suggests that she interprets this situation in prison as the punishment that she absolutely deserves. And like I said, the fact that she's hanging out with that woman is pretty evident that she has a very low bar when it comes down to actually spending time with people who have a level of meaning in this world. Sophie Lerner, who was 21 when she was killed, when she had her body thrown on a bonfire, that's the mark of Sabrina. And yet here these two are, these guilty parties, having done the most horrendous things, hanging out, enjoying spending time with each other and seeing themselves as leaders of the pack. And the fact that she's not showing any remorse is deeply concerning. If you don't show remorse, if you don't take accountability, if you don't take responsibility, then you are literally going to be a danger for the rest of your life. It's as simple as that. Apparently, when she was waiting to actually have her sentencing, so when she'd gone into prison but hadn't figured out exactly how long she was going to spend in there, she was basically going around saying, at the end of the day, she's going to get away with it. She's not got a problem. She's going to get out. She just didn't believe that she was going to get sent down. That, to some degree, makes me happy. because she did get sent down. Now, when this information came out, HMP Bronzefield were actually asked about this behaviour, and a spokesperson said, we don't comment on individuals, of course they don't, but it is telling. And like I said, it marks, as far as I'm concerned, the nature of this woman. And like I said, I don't hold out for her ever being remorseful, apart from the fact that she lost her freedom. I'm sure that's the only thing that will bother her, not the fact that she was a predatory, violent abuser of young children and potentially could have gone on to do something even worse than what I've covered today. As ever, guys, I know that we're all in situations where we're busy, we have children, we put them in places where we want to protect them, such as nurseries, but I think that there is something that speaks about this particular case, and that is if you are seeing things like odd marks, if you are seeing bruising that's not consistent with normal accidents, just make sure you document it. Definitely go and speak to the doctor, get them to note those injuries as well, and then go and speak to the nursery or the place of care and make clear that you absolutely want a full investigation to take place. You just have to err on the side of caution. It could be something completely innocent, but your babies deserve that, and it can feel really challenging to go and have those conversations. Nobody likes to offend anybody, but in this kind of case, it demonstrates that risking offending, that pushing further, that asking difficult questions can really pay off in the long run. And in this case, could actually have prevented a child being even more seriously injured than all of her victims were. Look after yourselves, guys. Let me know in the comments your thoughts. Be safe.